However, this is for crafting compelling presentations. We felt as though this was a need. We gauged the audience as well. We've had a chat to a few people, and quite a few people have said that it would be nice to see what denotes or what is a compelling presentation today, because it's always evolving. And obviously the goal is to leave your audience impressed from that perspective. So let me kick on. Thank you for making Presales Collective possible. It's because of you, all of our membership base, that we're able to be here and we're able to share back and give back to the community. The point of Presales Collective is to elevate the role of pre-sales worldwide. We want to recognize outstanding pre-sales practitioners, and we also want to provide resources, knowledge, and network to develop impactful pre-sales careers. Basically, we want to share the love, we want to give back to the community, we want to help those who are thinking about pre-sales as a career, and also those who are early in their career at pre-sales, but also leverage the veterans of pre-sales that are here. And I see quite a few of them on my camera today as well. You have knowledge, we want to hear it. We want that knowledge to be shared. Also, if you have any ideas about further webinars, we'd love to hear about that as well. And we're also launching a series of face-to-face meetups throughout the region. So Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Singapore. Japan is to be confirmed. We're still working on Japan, but we aim to have those face-to-face meetups on a quarterly basis. There's one happening in Sydney tonight. And Jonas, when's the Singapore one?
It's actually tonight as well.
Yeah, okay. So we all decided to make it tonight, as well as this webinar. So fun times. But do keep an ear out. We would love to see you at these events. It fills our soul with joy to see you and have a chat about pre-sales, about what challenges you might be facing. We'll share what challenges we're facing. Maybe you've got some suggestions. We want to build this community. And judging by the fact that we have quite a few participants on the call, it sounds like we're succeeding in building a bit of a community. So to get the most out of today's webinar, ask questions throughout on the chat and be active in the chat. And at the end, we will open up. So this is Crafting Compelling Presentations. Josh King, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So I'm Josh King. I'm based in Melbourne. I've been in Australia for about 18 years or so, originally from the US, and I'm an APAC pre-sales veteran. Like many people, I sort of came through the post-sales space, implementation, onboarding, training, found the I think the nirvana that is pre-sales, and loved the combination of all things that it entails. So I've been doing it for many years. Most recently with a company called Playvox that I joined through a startup into acquisition, and yeah, I love it. So I'll pass that on to Paul.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Baptist. I've been fortunate enough to be part of the Presales Collective since its inception, which is great. So about almost 4 years ago now. So I am, if you're looking at my job title, you're going, what is this guy doing at a pre-sales event? If you cut me, I bleed pre-sales. So I love the role. I've been a pre-sales leader, and it's only recently that I got into a GM role. So if nothing else that you take away from this, hey, with a pre-sales experience, you can go anywhere. So, I love to kind of share a little bit about what I've been doing as well. Dave, your turn.
Yeah, we call him El Capitan. Dave Centellis, Enterprise Architect at Workday.
I think it's El General.
El General. Well, who's El Capitan? I think that's JR. Anyway, we digress. Dave Centellis, Enterprise Architect at Workday. I've been doing pre-sales. Pre-sales was my first job out of uni. So essentially, I started off at a company called Computer Associates. They're kind of still around now, and then bounced around to Oracle, to Dell, and to VMware and Qualtrics, and now I'm at Workday. So I've got about 23, 25 years experience in pre-sales. That's all I've ever done my whole career, and it's probably all I'm ever going to do unless Paul anoints me into deputy general manager. Anyway, I digress. So the agenda for today, I'm going to talk about these three main areas. So making it about the customer, visuals to stun, and never finish on a thank you, which sounds really interesting to me, at least. Then Paul's going to talk about, is there a perfect number? building content quickly, and practice some more. And then we'll have Josh talk about logistics and prep, keep it flowing, and using slides effectively. So introduction. Why are presenting skills necessary in pre-sales today? Well, communication is key, and a presentation is nothing but communication, and usually it's one way. Enunciation is vital. People don't really care too much about accents, but if you start to present, and you can start looking at people who are famous for their presenting, say newscasters, they enunciate every single consonant and vowel, so they speak quite eloquently. That is something that really carries across nicely, and in a normal conversation might be a bit too much, but if you enunciate every single consonant and vowel, I don't know how you enunciate a vowel. Oh, anyway. But if you enunciate, then people can understand you better, which means that you have a greater chance of getting your message across. So when presenting, it really matters to do that. And ultimately, we need to get our point across in the best way we know how. And that's how you build your presentation skills bank. So your ability of soft skills to deliver that message. How do I differentiate myself? There are a number of other vendors the customer is going to hear from. We need to get our point across. Why will they remember you? How will they remember what you said? That can all be controlled by what you do during your presentation. And lastly, what's the point? So what is the goal of a presentation? How do we make it compelling? How do I feel compelled? You've presented to me. How do I feel like I want to progress with this deal? How do we engage so that we keep their attention? And attention is key. So customers may remember up to 3 factual nuggets from your content, is what I've found in my experience. But they'll usually rely on their gut feel. So the 3 points of gut feel that you should probably be focusing on is how you made them feel. If they feel the solution solves their problem, and if they like you. It really is that simple. And they will like you if you start to do certain things in your presentation style that make you likable. And then now that you know this, you can kind of make it proactive when it comes to giving them the nuggets. Some of those nuggets, you could say something like, if you're going to remember anything from this presentation, remember this point. And 3 times they'll probably remember that because you've really called it out, because that focuses the attention. That's one of the tricks of the game of presenting. So here are my 3 points. Make it about the customer, never finish on a thank you and visuals to stun. Here's a presentation I did to a water utility company. Look, it was all about the water for them. So we made the presentation style seem to be reflective of the customer. I put in that tagline. Taglines seem to be working now with my presentations, and that's completely optional for you. I did put in taste the difference. I did get one feedback from one customer or one person at the customer who said, that's a bit corny, but laughed. We broke the ice. We had a lovely chat. It worked really well. Yes, it's corny. Taste the difference because we're a different water. Yes, you're a water utility company, but the following slides had things like pipes and water in them. And it helped them build that affinity with yourselves. Here, this is for a university, the University of XYZ. It's all about the students for them. Like if you put yourself into their shoes, you can understand what is important to them. Providing water is important. Providing education to our students. And here is a student who looks happy to be at university. I wasn't like that, but hey, that's another story. And lastly, this is a data and analytics company, and I use the tagline here, all data tells a story. I don't know where I came up with that. I just did. And essentially, the picture really brings that visual effect of, hey, yes, there's little nuggets of information hidden within data. It's a story. I can tell that story with this data. And Workday provides the ability to tell a story from your data. So there's a lot that you can work with when it comes to making it about the customer. It is making it about them. It's not about taking your corporate deck and changing a few titles and using that. because that means it's about you, and they're not going to care. Customers don't care nowadays about that. I'm getting a lot of nods. They don't care. Now, never finish on a thank you. That's interesting, if I do say so myself. This is brave. Look, I also hesitated in calling it brave. I'd call it a little weak. When you finish your presentation, do you say any questions? Thank you. And that's it? Or let me come back to you with some answers if you had to take some action items. And then you hand it to the account executive and then stare at them intently like, okay, your turn. That's weak. That's weak. You've drawn their attention this whole time. You've created some beautiful visuals. You've created a presentation that's about them. And then you've led up to this one moment, and then you've let it go. So what's braver? So what do we feel are the next steps here? What did you think of the solution? Solicit feedback from the people in the audience, from the customer. I've done this. In fact, the account executive looked at me stunned, and I asked the head of HR, so what do you think? Do you think that this would work for you? And she looked at me and she smiled. She said, yeah, I think this would really work for me. And the account executive was over the moon because that was immediate feedback that he can use to really strengthen that deal when explaining that deal to management. So that's braver. And then finally, the bravest that I've found is, does this sound like what you're looking for? Does it solve your problem? Asking directly, does it solve your problem? Because that gives them a chance to say, oh, look, it does, but we're missing this piece. And then you can pivot and cover that off in that same presentation. Do you see yourself using the solution today? So then when you ask that question, people will start to visualize in their mind, oh, could I be using this solution? Yeah, I could use this. This solves the problem. Once they visualize themselves using it, it knocks down a barrier and allows you to speed up that deal. And lastly, your pre-sales, you're the experts in that field, in that area. So you can recommend, do you see yourself, based on others with similar issues that I've found, I recommend that your next steps are X, Y, and Z. How does that sound? And then they can change that. They can modify it, or they can go with your recommendation. But you're the expert here. Let's not forget that. And finally, visuals to stun. This was a customer that I was pitching to that manages sheep, if you will, across a certain geography. So this was one of the most beautiful pictures that I found that had to do with that because it was about the sheep. This was about the cows that they had in their farms. It just looks nice. And this is where I got a little crazy with AI. Look, this could be a bit much. I didn't actually go to some sheep and put on like a lamb's wool thing. This is AI, but it looks good. And it's a talking point because we have AI in our product. And that's why we're able to talk about this and the next steps and so on. So don't be afraid to use some amazing visuals. I do sign up for another organization to take their visuals, so to take their stock photos, and they've also got some AI generated photos. I do use that. A lot of people use things like Canva. I use FreePick, but it really is up to you. There's so many organizations, and for that price, it can really improve your presentation game. Because if I see a lamb with sunnies on, it gets my attention. So the key takeaways from my piece for today, it's never about you. I hate to say it, it never is. It's always about them and what this means for you is. So when you give a nugget of information about your product that you're selling that will solve their problem, you can say, and here's the dashboard that covers that area to show you how we're going to solve that problem. And what this means for you is less time spent in having to build those dashboards yourself, less time spent having to gather all that data and sanitize it and put it together, more time focused on the business and the things that actually matter to you. So, and what this means for you is put on a show, Let's be memorable. Remember, you've got other vendors that are also presenting to that customer, and be brave. Ask a question. We're not sales. I mean, we are sales, but we're not the sales executives. So we can get away with asking these kind of questions. So from here, I'm going to hand over to Paul so that we can see his part of the presentation.
So let me jump into something that I like to call the rule of three. Now, I can't claim that this is something that I've created myself. This is something I've picked up over many, many years, and something that I still ascribe to quite a bit. Here's something that's a three, the famous architectural thing that's made of threes. Yes, you're right. It is a four-sided pyramid, but there's stability in the triangle, right? And as we know this, that we're thinking about threes, we think about triangles, we think about pyramids. Here's another famous triangle, right? The Louvre. We've also seen this. But more than that, like this idea of threes really has ingrained itself into our culture as well, from movies, stories that we grew up with. This idea of a three feels that there is a lot of completeness in it. In fact, it's so ingrained in us that it's also permeated quite a lot of our language, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, location, location, location. Everybody, you can start two of these words and somebody else will finish it for you. I came, I saw, I conquered. Like all the way through to Caesar in the Roman times, also comes in threes. And for a lot of us as children, we all know this really, really well. Stop, look, listen, right? Something that we've grown up doing. And if you were like me growing up in Asia, you probably get smacked first and then told to stop, look, and listen. So happens quite a lot, but it comes in threes. And in fact, in Latin, this idea of omni trium perfectum speaks mostly about this idea that says everything that comes in threes is perfect. Now, for that purpose, I want to share with you the rule of three when it comes to creating content, because just as much as the tools that surround your content helps you build compelling presentations, the content itself also needs to be something memorable. So here is my rule of three in case, because I wanted to hold up a picture and wasn't sure whether someone could be able to see me, but that's my rule of three right there, which a picture that I just took earlier this morning. So for the rest of this presentation, while I'm presenting this, I would love for you guys to look around your desk. If you could have a piece of paper handy, grab it, grab a pen, because we're going to do a little bit of an exercise in about 4 or 5 minutes time. So let's talk a little bit about rule of three, right? So don't forget, look for a piece of paper that you can draw a triangle on and a pen that you can use to draw with. And also keep in mind, you've got the Q&A button, and you can also interact with everybody on the chat. So here's my idea called the content triangle. It's simply just a triangle that has 3 points. Quite often when we're building presentations, we think about all of the messages that we want our customer or our audience to hear. However, sometimes too much really is too much. How can you actually distill all of the myriad messages you want into just 3 things? Because of the importance of 3, people remember the threes better. If you have 2, they're always left hanging, wanting a third. If you have 4, you're starting a separate thought and actually going beyond something that's already complete. So we'd like to think about it in threes. And so again, as you're beginning to think about your next presentation and you're building content, think about that. What are the 3 messages you want this audience to leave with? Now, you might also be thinking, Paul, 3 points really isn't enough. Like, how do I actually do that? I've got to speak for an hour, or my solution is so complex, it's actually more than 3. Well, don't worry. You can actually break your 3 points into 3 bullets as sub bullets each. And then those bullets can also have 3s underneath them. But the whole concept is to remember that at the end of the day, if you were to summarize this, there are only 3 things that people have to remember. So how does this work in practice, though? Let's talk a little bit about that. Here's an example of how I might be able to use the content triangle for a company story. So a company story, quite often we hear our account executives share it. Sometimes they might throw to us and ask us to share it. Well, if we have to tell a company story, we might start with how the company started, where the company is now, what the vision and direction is going forward. Now, if you break this down, you could kind of say, there are sub bullets underneath how the company started. So you might think about the story you would tell. So 3 points. When did it start? Who was the founder? What did she want to achieve when she created the company? Where the company is now? What achievements have you had? What's the closest customer that you've recently helped that ties a great story? What is a great, compelling thing, product solution that you've released recently? And then moving forward, where are you headed? Why are you headed there? And how are you going to get there? Feature, capability, benefit, and call to action. Now, all of us, because we're great SEs, all of you are thinking, Paul, I can't believe you said features and functions. You should be telling a story. You're right. That's why I specifically call it a specific product feature, right? So you might still have to talk about specific product features, and that's okay. But you might say, hey, this feature does this, that, in this way, and that. Cool. What value does it deliver, and how can it help you? And then finally, the call to action is, how can we move forward with this using one of Dave's bravest comments, right? So you can tie things in threes so that they give a completeness. Here's another one, opportunity, challenge, and solution. You're breaking up the same message, but in three different ways. Maybe you're doing a technical deal review. Well, describe what the value of the desired outcomes are. So what's the opportunity here? What are the challenges? What's getting in the way of what I'm trying to do? And then describe potential solutions and ask for support and feedback. Really great way to break something into three when you're doing a technical review. Or you can actually just do something as simple as, I don't necessarily have a specific format, but I just want to talk about three different things. So here's an idea. Maybe you want to talk about ice cream. I love ice cream. So I might say, what is ice cream? What does it mean to me? I might tell you a story about my first date and the Swenson's volcano. Yeah, I know everyone's now going like, tell us about the first date, Paul. But more importantly, I might actually finish it off by saying, I might want all of you to go and make memories with a loved one, right? Over ice cream. So this is something you can do. And this idea of three is something you very, very quickly get to the point where you can create content that's compelling, that's easy to remember, and more importantly, easy to repeat. Somebody else can tell your story for you. So let's try this out, shall we? No, I'm not suggesting I'm going to give everyone an ice cream. There you go, Dave. Like a nice visual. Yeah. See, I listen to Dave. But here are some words. I'd love for you to go and grab your piece of paper now. All right, so everyone grab that piece of paper. You can draw a triangle if you wish. You don't have to use the same one. Pick a word from here or pick another word. Your call. You can decide. I just thought I'd throw some words on there just by looking around my house when I was building the slide deck. But pick a word out of here. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, okay, because we do have a content to run through today. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Here's a timer, and then we're going to just stay silent. And you're going to get 2 minutes to try to build out from this word 3 bullet points. 3 points. You can actually break it down to sub points if you wish. And then we're just going to kind of come back and try it out. So here's your 2 minute counter. But everyone pick a word from your 2 minute counter from the list before or from.
Can you go back to the list, Paul?
I can.
I'm not going to sing a song. Sorry.
Don't worry. I've also got a counter on my phone. So I'll remind you when we're 1 minute away. I'm also going to do one, by the way. So I'm going to quickly pick a word. We're at 1 minute. So just remember 3 points that you can use. And underneath of each of these, you might also start to have some sub bullets. If you don't want to use one of these words, you can use maybe a product feature or a message from your business that you want to try out. It's a nice way to play with this. So let's take a look. I'm going to stop share now. Stop my share. Here we go. And everyone can kind of see me. Here's mine. Okay, I'll put up the camera. Okay, so I chose coffee. All right, now I'm just going to show it to you, and now of course going to use it to try to read what I read. I can't read it upside down. So I had 3 points. Mine is, what does it mean to me? The second point was Melbourne, and the third point was build relationships. So what it means to me was I would tell a story around how I use it as a pick-me-up. It's basically a way to kickstart my day, but also it's also because I just kind of love the taste. So what does it mean to be here are 3 points. Under Melbourne, I'm going to talk about the fact that Melburnians are mostly coffee snobs. I'm also a Melburnian. Most of the Melburnians here would probably agree. I want to talk about something called Magic, which is a coffee that you only really find in Melbourne. So talk about that, which is interesting. And then talk about my favorite place in Melbourne to go get a coffee, which would be contentious in itself. But I really like a coffee at a place called Brother Baba Boudin on Little Burke. Then the third one is build relationships. So I'm going to talk about how I meet friends for coffee, I meet colleagues for coffee, but I also use coffees to help mentor people as well. So I have a lot of mentoring sessions over coffee too. And so those are just my 3 points. And if you think about it, in 2 minutes, we've kind of come up with 3 bullets, 3 points, 3 bullets each. And if you kind of do this quite often, it gets into a rhythm of what you get the chance to do. So now, who would love to give it a go?
Paul,
I'm happy to
it's
jump into one if
interesting.
you want.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I just did, it's a good diagram because it's probably completely unreadable to everybody else. Really just, I took the deadline one and I took it from a time management perspective, and probably if you're talking to someone about how to adjust the deadlines and maybe even negotiate them. So the 3 key points are importance, urgency, and resources. I only got to break the resources one down into 3 sub-points, which is resources in terms of time, money, and people. And I think that would be a presentation you could talk to people about, with this, how you figure out whether a deadline's going to be met or not, or negotiated.
I was just going to say it's interesting because I picked coffee as well, but it's interesting that, everybody approaches it from their own perspective, and mine was very different from yours in that I've got a little sort of barista machine at home, and it's been a little hobby I've picked up. So, mine was all about selecting the right beans and, dialing in a grind size, and then trying to, upskill on latte art and making designs on top of the coffee and things like that. So it was very much about the logistics of making coffee as opposed to, what it means and where you get it and those types of things.
Maybe I can. Hi, Paul. That
Go for
was a
it.
good one. Because what are the odds? I also picked up the coffee one. Same as Josh. I think
the
it's the easy
Melburnians
one,
to pick
right?
it.
Being a Melburnian. Yes. But definitely, I didn't go to those details as what you did, but probably those points around, for me as a coffee, is like good for chats or have a good catch up with people, and also around the points around with the coffee. It's not that a need that everybody would be liking the same sort of coffee, like magic or anything. So each one a different taste, and coffee is that for you to have that make possible. There's just, you need to just call out to your barista and say that, hey, I want this coffee, and that's done for you.
Absolutely.
I
So
think
again, nice and simple. Yeah, nice and
Yes.
simple, 3 clear messages. So thanks for sharing, KJ. So look,
Thanks.
I think, I would absolutely encourage you all to try this out. So I've shared my screen again, so you should be able to see the 3 takeaways from here. The rule of 3, remember, it's important in our society. We see it in our architecture, we see it in our culture through movies, we see it in our language. I want you, this is also something to help you structure the content in an easy to remember way for yourself, for your audience, and also make it easy for them to repeat. And then lastly, I want to leave you with practice, practice, practice. Do it by yourself, do it with your friends, and do it often. And if you notice, pretty much everything I talked about also came in 3s. Now, just as a leave behind, I would encourage you, something that I used to do with some of my teammates when we were individual contributors many, many, many years ago. I think it might even have tried it with you guys once, Jonas, in Singapore. But we used to basically sit around, have a team meeting, and then everybody would write a word, we'd chuck it into a little basket, and every week we'd pick one up, and someone would have 2 minutes to be able to stand in front of everybody else and practice this. And you just practice creating content on the fly, making it memorable, and finally presenting it in a nice, compelling way. So with that, thanks so much. I should have remembered not to just thank you. I shouldn't have said thank you, should I, Dave? I should have said, like, what do you think about this session? Do you think that this is something that you can use for yourself? What do you think, Josh, as I hand over to you?
That would have been the braver approach, Paul.
Over to you, Josh.
No, it's good. So listen, I appreciate that. There's been some great stuff. We've heard some really good tips from Dave and Paul on crafting compelling presentations. When we originally bandied about this webinar, we were also thinking of like tips and tricks. And so for this last section, I want to focus on some technical tips and tricks, some of the logistics of presentations that are easy to overlook, but can make a big difference in the end product. We'll very briefly look at some of the preparation that you can set, that can basically set you up for success and help keep things flowing, and then also how slides can help prop up a live demo. So I will say some of this may seem like presentation 101 for some of you. I'm hoping we have a nice healthy mix of both experienced and maybe inexperienced folks from the pre-sales community. But I'm also a firm believer in the value of revisiting the basics periodically. And these are all things that I've had to go over even with experienced team members. Sorry, I'm just moving things on my screen so I can see. So just as a little bit of a visual, you don't want to put together an elegant and compelling presentation and content, here represented as a beautiful Aston Martin, only to have to drive it over this. So let's talk about what creating what I'm going to call like a smooth road looks like for a presentation. Now I'm going to do a little bit of live-ish demoing. And for context, I'm using a free version of a popular productivity tool. It's something I've recently signed up for to help me track some home renovations. So I suppose it's a free ad for them. But on the plus side, my wife was thrilled that I finally set a deadline for finishing up some of our perpetual renovations. So just as a starting point, when you're presenting, you want your audience to focus on your content and messaging and on nothing else. So the more you can do to limit visual noise and unnecessary clutter, the better off you'll be. I want to start with some easy do's and don'ts. So first of all, you do want to do things like hide bookmarks. And I don't have them on at the moment, but if I just sort of flip over here for a second, nobody that's looking at your presentation needs to know what recipes I've been researching, which are not exciting. I'll go ahead and tell you now, or how well my son's basketball team is doing, or anything like that. So it's quite easy to toggle that off in most browsers. It's worth a few extra seconds of prep before you get in and start demoing. In Chrome, for example, a Control-Shift-B will just hide that, take it away. It works the same in Edge, Command-Shift-B if you're working on Mac. So it's just a really easy thing you can do to give you a little bit more screen real estate and clean up what you have on screen. Now let's look at a couple of the don'ts. And I'm going to put two up there together. We've got dancing mouse and mashing keyboard. And I'm just going to flip over to a little bit of a demo for a second. So as we pull up this productivity platform, how many times have you seen this in a demo where somebody says, we're just going to look over here, and then I want you to follow me to the assigned to me, and let's look over at these things, and my mouse is dancing all over the place. If your audience is like me, their eye will be twitching about now. It makes it really hard to stay focused on your message. So you want to use the mouse to draw attention, but let it rest while you're talking. So if I want to pull your attention, I'll just move the mouse over, leave it there, give them time to digest what's happening, slowly move it over to the next bit. If you need to, we're always trying to break habits, take your hand off of it and just let it sit there so that they can focus on your content and your messaging. And then, of course, we've all seen this as well. So we're running through our story. We're going into, in this case, what might be a task, and we're going to add a description. And so we just say, right, I'm going to come in here. Whoops, bear with me one second, guys. I'm going to come in here and do this. And you see the keyboard mash. You never want to do that in a demo. So you always want to make sure that your content is relevant. Keep it short and sharp. We don't want War and Peace, but you want to make it match the story that you're telling. On top of that, know your own typing skills. Nobody wants to watch you type like this if you're really slow, but just get something in there. So you might have seen what I had in before, but just keep it nice, short and sharp, share it, whatever you're doing for your story, and you can sort of move on from there. So those are I think the cardinal sins of presenting is avoiding the dancing mouse and the keyboard mash. So just to jump back over here for a second, the last thing that I'm going to round out the do's and don'ts with, and this is one I'm pretty particular with, but try not to jump in and out of slideshow mode. And what you'll see a lot of times, I'm just going to back out of here for a second. Oftentimes you'll be in slideshow, you're on full screen, you're going through that, and now we want to pivot away from that, go into the demo, do something like that. So we hit escape, we come out of that, we have this nice peek behind the curtain at our slide deck and all of those things, and you don't really want to go there if you don't have to. If you're not aware, in Google Slides, instead of slideshow, you can select presenter view, which will bring up a presenter box that you can close out, but still gives you a full screenish view that sits inside a browser tab. So now if I need to pivot to my demo, come back to my slide deck, you can do that, and it's pretty seamless to go back and forth. If you're working outside of Google, you've got PowerPoint, or you're in another platform, Alt-Tab can take you back and forth from a full screen slide deck into a demo and back without having to escape out, look at the behind the scenes view and do those types of things. So again, just a nice, easy thing you can do to keep things sort of moving nice and smoothly while you're doing that. So just a few of the do's and don'ts. I think they're pretty time-tested basics, but it gets your presentation off on the right foot. Now, the next tip we want to look at focuses on what I call preloads and, I guess, keyboard shortcuts. So things that'll keep your demo flowing so that your audience can focus on your messaging and not on the logistics. This is not a replacement for having a great story. Your flow still needs to make sense. You want to avoid giving tours and what I like to call jump cuts, where you're sort of abruptly switching from one part of your solution to another without context. So that's all still super important. But that said, what's the bane of live demos? Doesn't matter how cool or friendly or mesmerizing your loading indicator is, nobody wants to get stuck watching that during a demo. So what do we mean by preloads? If we just jump back over here for a second, in our productivity tool, there are a lot of sort of features and functions that we can run through. And let's just say our story goes from our home screen to this house reno list that I've got put together. So I can click through to the reno list. I can wait for it to load in. I can come in and expand what I want to see and tell the story that I want to tell. But if I know my story is going there anyway, I like to preload this information into another browser tab. And of course, you can sort of click back and forth between them and do those sorts of things manually. But I can also tell my story and do it like this. So if I know I'm going there, I like to just come down, move the mouse so contextually the customer can follow what we're doing, but then I can just do a Control Tab, which automatically moves me to that tab that I've preloaded, and I've got all that content pulled up in exactly the way I want to display it without having to wait for it to load. Now, this system's loading pretty quickly, but you never know what the internet speed gods are going to be doing or what's going to be happening with your bandwidth. So it's just a way to protect yourself to not have to wait or be reliant on some of those things. Makes it a little bit more seamless. So in Chrome and Edge and browsers like that, Control Tab will move you forward, Shift Control Tab will move you back, and Command will work in place of that on a Mac. And then think about how your flow can avoid the jump cuts. So if you're navigating from one to the other, as I said, use your mouse to sort of pull the attention, let them see what's happening. If I'm moving on to, let's say, the dashboard space, my mouse is showing them what we're doing, but then I'm quickly pulling that up so I don't have to wait for the loading to come through. So using preloads can also help you facilitate what I call a show response to a question. As SEs, it's pretty important that we can identify when a yes or no will be sufficient to avoid hopefully going into verbal quicksand. But if you do need to show something in response to a question, preloads can make it easy to jump back to a previous screen or module without leaving what you're doing and having to reload pages. So we're working on dashboards, a question comes up and I want to go back and reference my house reno list. I can just quickly jump over there, address the question that's come up, and then I'm back into my dashboards without having to reload and wait and navigate and maybe lose what I've pulled up on the dashboards page. So it's just an easy way to move around the platform and do that. So one other thing, this is the last thing I'll round out this particular section with, is something that I was really glad to find that I wasn't aware of for a long time, Chrome discards. If you're not aware of them, if you are going to preload pages in a browser, Chrome will often try to auto discard them to save memory. And it sort of defeats the purpose of preloading pages because as soon as you click on it, it's going to try to reload that from scratch. So using the discards, which you can access at the URL that you see there, it essentially allows you to open a page where you can see all of the tabs that you've got open, and you can toggle them to make sure that they don't auto discard and they stay pulled up and fresh, if you will, in the browser. So again, just a little tip that you can have to make sure that things run a little bit smoother and you're not as subjected to, as I said, internet bandwidth or things like that. So just a little bit of preparation can help make sure that things run a lot more smoothly there. Now, the last sort of major tip that we've got is about using slides effectively. In a presentation, and again, this may be basic for many folks, but a lot of people feel like once you're in a live demo, you have to leave the slides behind. Like, we're in live mode now, we did our deck at the beginning and that's it. A well-placed slide can actually make your content a lot more engaging for your audience. And it's especially true when you're trying to cover something that's maybe more complex, either an idea or a process. So if we go back to our productivity platform for a moment, introducing a hierarchy like this so that everybody's got a little bit of clarity on what we're looking at when we're in the platform. I could explain something like this via the UI while I'm doing that verbally, but sometimes seeing it as an image or a diagram, excuse me, makes it a lot easier to digest. They sort of say that I think it's less that people will retain less than 50% of what you share, and I think it leans lower than that. So the worst thing that can happen for retention is that your audience has questions rolling around in the back of their mind while you're trying to talk about other things. They're thinking about those questions and not what you're sharing. In a previous role, I had a fairly complex platform with a scheduling component. We'd tell the high-level overview before showing it, but we were constantly finding that we were getting basic questions from customers that we'd just shared with them. So it was clearly too much for them to take in verbally, and something was getting lost in translation. So I introduced a simple slide like this, although it was much nicer looking. This is just a placeholder, so that we could introduce it at the appropriate time. There was a visual to go along with it, and it virtually did away with the redundant questions. Customers' understanding was significantly improved, and because those initial questions were answered, I think we had a lot better focus on what we were actually sharing with the customers. So, of course, you don't want to sort of slide or PowerPoint your audience to death, but you do want to use them judiciously to support the messaging that you've got. And now I've got one bonus. So with Paul's presentation, I could not, on the rule of three, I couldn't very well have 4 points. So consider this like a 3.2 or a bonus. Present and be present. So even when you're remote, try to present as if you're in person. Make sure your camera's on. Try to look at the camera periodically. You don't want to force it, but if you usually talk with your hands, I'm doing a little bit of that now. Don't be afraid to do that. Angle your camera in such a way so that it shows, and it just gives your presentation a little bit of a human element. If your setup allows, I know not everybody's does, you can try standing up. Gives you a little bit of a different projection when you're standing. Maybe can settle nerves and make you feel a little bit more like you're at an in-person presentation. But again, the key is just to present as if you're all sitting or standing in a room together around a table and try to forge a connection with your audience. So just the quick takeaways from today. I'm not going to sit there and read through them for you, but hopefully that was useful. Again, some basic stuff, but some great things to remember, and things that you can leverage in conjunction with hopefully your already compelling presentation content. So thanks for that, and I'll turn back over to you, Dave.
We still have a few slides at the end to kind of wrap things up, but we've got about 5 minutes here. Does anybody want to call out anything that is their golden nugget when they present? What do you go to that you think has the biggest impact that we could all take away and use from you? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I was just thinking when Josh was covering off the virtual stuff, something I've noticed over the years is that when you have to present virtually, you have to over-present. You have to put more energy into it because you're going to end up being, as far as your audience is concerned, you're going to be broken down to this little box. So you've got to push more through that screen, if that makes sense. But yeah, glad that Josh touched on the virtual stuff because we get forced to do it so much. And there's a few tips and tricks to that as you covered off, which help.
That's a great
Yeah,
one,
it's
Nathan.
hard as well. It's hard to read the room when you're presenting and you're in the flow, because then you got to be like, what's going on there? Oh, that guy's not engaged. I think, like, how do you do that? And that's where I rely on my colleagues. I'm usually presenting with a colleague and I say, hey, you know, flag it to me if someone's not, like, interrupt me in my flow if someone's not engaged, and say something that can put me back on track so that, you know, I can continue to engage the room. But that's one of the biggest dangers, I think, with virtual.
I think it sort of highlights the importance of actually making a note of the names of everybody that's in the presentation and then addressing each individual, right? Because to Nathan's point, that keeps them engaged when you're doing that virtual conversation, and then their mind can't meander somewhere else, right? Because, you know, you could suddenly ask them, you know, what their opinion is, you know, but I think that's why you need to really be clear on, you know, what the names of everybody are and then address them individually throughout the presentation.
I think my point is around logistics. So you need to be in a room where the lighting is appropriate because it's actually add to the entire environment. And then if you need to invest on technology, so say, for example, like a good pair of headset or maybe a mic, which make you sound better, especially for the virtual one, I think that's key.
Yeah, exactly. It's like investing in the stock photos that I did. You know, you might have to shell out a little bit, but it'll skyrocket your presentations and your career in general. So absolutely, completely agree. Hunter, you came on to video. Did you want to add something?
What really resonated with me was what Josh said at the end there about standing up, presenting on camera. Strangely, I actually get significantly more nervous presenting over Zoom than I do in person. And by standing up, it helps to emulate that.
Oh, that's a great call. Yeah, okay. Settle some nerves if you stand. Great. Any final thoughts?
Maybe a question, I would say, to the point which you were saying, David, around people when they are, they might not be really engaged with you. Maybe they have just gone off beat because the demo was just going for a long time. So how do you bring them back to that engagement? Because yes, we could just understand the audience or maybe the names, but how do you really bring them back to the engagement so that they don't lose the track and then totally see the demo not valuable to them?
Yeah, I'd absolutely assess why they got distracted. So is it because what I'm presenting is dry? Dry is okay as long as you can manage it. So my go-to is if I'm presenting dry, I'd do like 30 minutes of prezzo and then be like, okay, let's take 10 minutes, let's stretch our legs, bio break, let's come back. Oh, okay, we're all back. What did you think of this? What did you think of that? Does that solve your problem? You know, really get them engaged again and then continue on. But it does depend on what they're distracted about. Are they on their phone because something's blowing up in the IT department? Well, there's not much you can really do about that. Paul, Josh, any thoughts on or open to the field? Anybody can think about, like, if they've got a mini crisis happening, there really is not much you can do. Thoughts?
Yeah. At that point, you might be better off rescheduling. It's like, you know, we understand you've got something urgent to address. You know, let's come back together. If you don't have their attention, you might be trying to run uphill anyway. And I think on your other point, calling people out by name, if you can tell they're just distracted and not for something important, try to reel that back in. You know, if you've been called on, you have to participate. It's like, hey, you know, how is this going to affect your particular part of the business? Or, you know, what do you think here?
Yeah,
I do something similar with calling people's name, but you know, quite often, like for me now that I do a lot of presentations in certain parts of Asia, where you know, putting people on the spot is not something you want to do. The way to kind of have the same impact is to use their name in an example. So you know, you might say, well, imagine if Dave is our HR leader. And now immediately Dave goes, someone said my name, right? But I'm not calling him out. I'm actually just using his name in an example. And so therefore it draws his attention back, but it doesn't call him out, nothing like that. Yeah.
That's a great point, that there are often cultural differences, aren't there, particularly across our region. So that's a really good point, Paul, that whereas in Australia we might get away with asking people a direct question, but in some other regions you're right, you don't want to call people out and put them on the spot. But the other thing I'd say I think it was it Cuthresh that asked that question. If you think you've got a really long presentation and you consistently notice that people's attention is waning, then look to cut the presentation down. I mean, if that is a consistent problem for you, then either the presentation is too long or the material is too in-depth and too complex for them to grasp in one bite, right? So you might want to either tailor specific bits of that presentation to different members of the audience, depending on what their roles are, or just simplify it. And the other rule of thumb is just do the last thing first, right? So whatever is your absolutely crown jewels of the features that you've got, show them first, because they're often the most relevant on what the audience will be most interested in. So maybe think about changing the order with which you present things, right? So quite often we start with very basic features and build up to what we think are our crown jewels, but really that should come first, because that's really where the value is to the audience.
Next steps, so calling out the next steps here, sign up to the Slack and come to the meetups. We want to see you. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're up to. Try at least one thing from this session. That's all you got to do. Just one thing. What really resonated with you? And let us know how it went. Add me on LinkedIn. I don't mind. I'm sure Paul, Josh, Jonas, I'm sure we don't mind either. Add us on LinkedIn. Message us. Message us on Slack. We want to know how it went. So look, thank you. That's a wrap. It's 1 o'clock. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.